Hola, hola. Today we're going to be talking about writing strategies, pero en español. So, writing can be challenging. This video is mostly to point out some areas that most students struggle in, and then also to give you some additional tools like transitions, vocabulary that you might be able to use depending on format, things like that. The first things we're going to talk about are grammar related. First one, subject-verb agreement. What does this mean? Your subject is like your yo, your tú, your él, ella, usted, nosotros, vosotros, ellos, ellas, ustedes. Subjects can also be things like la casa, el perro, los estudiantes. So they don't just have to be the typical ones that you hear. It's any subject. Next thing is your verb, and why do these two go together? So you talked about conjugating verbs previously. So we have like yo, and then if we have the verb bailar, to dance, remember in order to use this verb, we must drop the AR ending and conjugate our verb. So for the yo form, it would be baila. For the tú form, it would be bailas. Ooh, let's go back to this one. This is not baila. This one's bailo. Bailo. Yo bailo. And then el would be baila. So what is subject-verb agreement? It means that your subject matches your verb. So if you have yo, it ends in an L. The tú form for an AR verb ends in an AS. So your ending, remember, depends on the type of verb. Is it an AR verb, an ER verb, an IR verb? Is it irregular? Is it a stem changing verb? So something weird might happen somewhere else. These are all things that you have to make sure match. So what I would recommend doing is when you are writing and you write a sentence like yo tiene tres hermanos. Okay, instead of just spitting out that sentence and saying, okay, yep, I have 3 brothers. Go back and say, okay, my subject is yo. Is tiene correct? Does that one go with yo? Okay, I don't think so. So it is actually yo tengo. Okay, now if you can't remember that it's tengo and you have tiene, is that the absolute worst thing in the world? No, definitely not. I'd rather have a mistake and you make an attempt than you not try at all. But I would recommend at least going back to read what you wrote. Next part, gender agreement. Por ejemplo, la chica guapa. Or el perro es bajo. So by a gender agreement, we mean this is feminine, this is feminine, this is feminine, or here we have masculine, 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 okay? Now, if I decided to change this sentence because I don't actually have a boy dog, I have a girl dog, so I would write la perra es, and it wouldn't be bajo, it would be baja. So that is what gender agreement is, making sure that everything matches. Remember, not everything changes. Por ejemplo, the adjective inteligente. This one ends with an E. This one does not change to an A or an O. This one stays the same for both. So that is what gender agreement is. And lastly, we have number agreement. So, por ejemplo, we have la chica guapa, the pretty girl. So what if we wanted to say the pretty girls? Number agreement means making it plural. Las chicas guapas. So remember, in Spanish, we can't just make one thing plural. We have to make everything plural. So that is number agreement, making everything plural. Or singular, if necessary. All right, next thing we're going to talk about is punctuation. So I wrote a few sentences here. Me gusta bailar, cantar y dibujar. ¿Te gusta jugar al voleibol? And es muy interesante. We're missing some punctuation here. The first thing that I cannot express enough is that you cannot just get rid of commas and periods because we're writing in Spanish. Okay, so anywhere that you would normally have a comma in English, you're also going to have one in Spanish. Always, always, always end your sentences with a period, please. Next thing, if you take a look at the next one, ¿Te gusta jugar al voleibol? This is a question. You see the question mark here. Remember, in Spanish, we anticipate questions. We have to put one upside down before. If you're not sure how to draw that, flip your paper upside down, draw it like normal, flip it back over. It'll come out perfectly every time. And then the last thing, es muy interesante. See, we have an exclamation point here. We also need one of those at the beginning to anticipate that we are going to be saying something a little bit more expressive. So, one in the front, upside down. Those are the differences in English and Spanish, and also the similarities too with those commas and the periods. So, remember your punctuation. Do not forget it. Okay, here are some transitions. These are things that are just going to help your writing. We have primero, which is first. Entonces, then. Luego means later, but you would also use this when you're trying to say, like, next I do this, or then I do this. Finalmente, finally. También, also. I put this one on here, not really a transition, but this is a word that is very easily used in just about anything that you write about or talk about. Antes, before, and después, after. So these ones up here are pretty self-explanatory with how you use them. The tricky ones are before and after, so I do want to talk about those ones a little bit. Antes means before. So you could say like, oh, yeah, I go to the store. Oh, before I go to the store, I do this. You often use antes with de. So if you wanted to say that you go to the store, but before that, you eat dinner. So antes de comer la cena, voy a la tienda. How this would translate is, before eating dinner, I go to the store. So antes de comer. Please notice that you don't conjugate the verb comer here. When you're using de, an infinitive verb follows. Remember, the infinitive are the ones that end in er, er, or ir. You don't conjugate them. So antes de comer. And there you have an example using después de. Después de ir a la tienda, voy a dormir. So once again, you see de followed by an infinitive verb. So after going to the store, voy a dormir. I am going to sleep. So once again, infinitive verb used after de. Otherwise, antes just means before, después just means after, but when you use them with de, you have to have an infinitive verb. Another thought needs to come with it. The last thing we're going to talk about is format. So when you're given a writing prompt, the format is extremely important in how you convey the information. So if you're told to write an essay, make sure that you have paragraphs. Make sure that you have an introduction, a conclusion. Fortunately for Spanish 2, we really don't get into the essay. If you were going to write a dialogue, make sure that you include the speaker, like Maria, and then a colon, and then whatever she's going to say, and then the next person that's speaking. So you need to make sure that you're following the format of how a dialogue would normally look. The last one that we're going to talk about is a letter, because this is often what you're writing in for your formal CUAs, your formal assessments. In a letter, you first need a greeting. Very common one is the word querido or querida, depending on if you're writing to a female or a male. So You could say like, oh, querido Jorge. Now, something that's different in Spanish and English is that normally we would put a comma following Jorge's name. In Spanish, they actually put a colon. If you don't want to use that, you can also just use a different type of greeting. Like, hola, or hola Jorge. So any of those would be fine. And then you'll continue on with your writing of whatever you're doing. Remember, we often ask people questions too in our writing, if we're writing a letter in particular. And then we get to the end. This is where you need some type of farewell, despedida. One that is commonly used is un abrazo. This one you would use a comma with. Un abrazo actually means a hug. This is an informal type of farewell. This is something that you would use to a friend or a family member or a loved one. If you don't want to be so informal, you could just use like adios or hasta luego. So any of those would be fine. And then remember, finally, the last thing you want to do is you want to sign your letter. All right, hopefully you can use some of these writing strategies and vocabulary to help you out. Adios, gracias.